Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to FOBtv, the future of business. I'm your host, Kevin Benedict. I'm a lecturer and futurist here at TCS. And again, thank you for joining. Our guest today is David Kish. Now, David is a colleague of mine. He's a futurist, and he's a top 10 thought leader on ecosystems. And he's got the badge from Thinkers 360 to verify that. It's extraordinarily cool. So, David, thanks for joining us today.
Great to be here.
So where are you calling in from, and what's the weather like today?
I'm calling in from home, which is Boulder, Colorado, and we've got a little bit of a break from the 90-plus degree weather. So it's going to be quite nice. I think a high of 80 today. So very pleasant.
Oh, that's lovely. So when you hear the word sustainability, what does that mean to you personally?
So I've got a pretty specific understanding or definition for sustainability, and it's in context of what I'm more of an expert in is regeneration. So regeneration is the processes by which life exists on the earth. That's our carbon, water, nitrogen cycles. If you think of a forest, after a forest fire, how it comes back to life when it sprouts new saplings and so on. That's the process of regeneration. And the way I think about sustainability is our desire or goal to sustain that regenerative process.
So is there a scale from unsustainable to sustainable to regenerative? Is there a scale along the line, or are they different things?
I don't think of them in kind of a comparative nature. They're complementary. One is a systemic process, and one is a goal. So I think they work in a complementary way, and they're very synergistic.
Got it. So let me just ask, because not a lot of people focus a lot of their career on these topics of just sustainability and regeneration. Now you're passionate about regeneration in that discussion, exploration. You write a ton of cool articles on that. So talk to me about your experience, and what shaped your path to take you there.
So really my journey toward sustainability and regenerative systems was kind of founded in developmental psychology. I was running a re-engineering process and organizational change practice, and one of my colleagues within the team introduced me to a system called spiral dynamics. And it got me as a future thinker thinking about what we're going to need in the future, what's going to determine what motivates us and what kind of innovation and what kind of changes we'd make. And that led me to thinking about the kind of upper reaches of developmental psychology. And that led me to how we coexist together, how we create a future that works for everyone, where everyone can thrive. And that led me to the sustainability space.
Oh, man. Well, thanks for sharing that. That's fascinating. So here's the hard question. If you could change one thing about how the world works today, when you think about regeneration, sustainability, everything that you guys cover, so what would it be? What would you change?
I think it's founded less in ecological kind of perspective. It's more back to that developmental psychology, because I think if we were better at coexisting across our differences, and recognizing and understanding our interdependencies, it would naturally lead us in the direction of a more sustainable future. So that's one thing I would change if I could.
Got it. So, David, how in this world of polarization, how do you depoliticize these kinds of topics?
I don't know that I have a pat answer for that. They have a tendency to become politicized. We're in a more politicized and kind of divisive existence now. But the way I think about sustainability is our relationship with nature, with the other living creatures on the planet, and recognizing that we're kind of one with that existence. And for me, that's not political. That's just the context within which we live, and wanting to live in a way that's harmonious with that is the way I think about it.
That's a beautiful concept. Thanks for sharing that. So, what would a healthy relationship between humans and nature actually look like? Let's project ourselves 50 years into the future and say, what would it look like if we really were in a healthy relationship? Give us that aspirational view.
So the way I think about it is that there isn't separation between humans and nature, that we are a part of nature. We are nature. We're a part of that living system, and we're an integral, interdependent player with other species and with other forms of life. So a healthy relationship between humans and nature is really a healthy relationship that humans have with ourselves, because we're a part of that system. And it's kind of this realization that we are nature. It's all one system. And it's really about living within that system in a harmonious way.
So, David, you and I are both futurists on the Future of Business team here at Tata Consultancy Services. And we talk a lot about this phrase, what if? It helps us kind of think through various scenarios that might happen in the future. So let me give you a what if question to warm up here. What if we started seeing the earth in a more holistic manner and started treating our forest, oceans, and wildlife as actually essential infrastructure to the planet, like roads and power lines? How would that change things?
So I'll give a perspective that might not particularly address this in the way you might be expecting. So I don't think of nature as infrastructure. Infrastructure is man-made. It's something that provides utility and needs to be maintained. Sometimes we do a good job of maintaining it, sometimes we don't. But nature isn't a utility, right? Forests and oceans are living systems, right? So it's really about how we coexist within that system, right? And understanding that it's not something that we can necessarily maintain. It's not something that we have control over. It's not something that exists to provide us with a service or provide some form of utility. We are participants in that system. It's complex and unpredictable, and we have to learn how to thrive within that unpredictable or uncertain system.
From an economic standpoint, David, it seems like especially in the area of less developed nations out there that are struggling to build their economies and things, it's really a lot of times they're faced with this really difficult choice between economic growth and sustainability for their environment. Sometimes, they look at the environment and say, I want to support and protect nature and the environment after we've built our economy. They don't see it as necessarily possible to do both things at once. What's your response to that?
So I think it's a legitimate tension, right, between economies and the environment. And so we have to respect that that's there, right? But I don't think our economies are singular in nature. There are many economies across the world, some of them that should grow, some of them maybe that should shrink, some of them that should stay the same. But another, kind of perspective on this is redefining what we think is valuable, what we think we need to thrive. Right. And I don't think that growth has to come with more consumption necessarily. We can think about it in different ways. So it's a difficult thing. Our predominant way of thinking about growth is economic in nature. I think we need to expand that definition to think about what's healthy for humans, what's healthy for the planet, and what we need to thrive.
So I hear a lot about regenerative in the context of regenerative agriculture, David. What does that really mean? You take these farms, in a lot of ways we look at it and we think these things are kind of models of nature where you're trying to take care of the soil, you're trying to take care of nature and rotate crops and all these kinds of things. But what does regenerative agriculture mean, and how would we actually see that modeled out there?
So I'm not an expert in regenerative agriculture, but I can tell you what it means for me and what I take away from it as a bit of a novice. Our industrial agricultural systems focus on food production, right? It's what happens above the soil. And it doesn't recognize that there's a living ecosystem in the soil. And that living ecosystem of bacteria and the root systems of plants is vital to the health of the soil that enables us to grow food. And so what our industrial systems do is through use of fertilizers and tilling in ways that dry out the soil, they kill that living ecosystem and it becomes less and less able to produce food. So really regenerative agriculture is less about food production and more about soil health. And if we can produce the food that we need while maintaining the health of soil, that's really what regenerative agriculture is about, as I understand it.
Let's talk about the role of the C-suite. They're all held accountable to KPIs, but a company that actually wants to be supportive of sustainability and regenerative models and systems out there, how can they show value to their shareholders? You know, what is it? How do they operate and define value in a way that they will be rewarded by their stakeholders? Do we have a concept on how that might work?
Well, so there are ways to think about. So if we think about sustainability or regeneration as people thriving in complexity, that's a collective kind of issue or challenge. It's not something that any one organization can solve, right? So that naturally leads you to the need to collaborate across boundaries, right? And to move from measuring outcomes from individual organizations to ecosystems or society in general. So I think as it becomes more apparent that our challenges are not going to be solved through KPIs or individual performance or going to, net zero carbon footprint as an individual organization, it will become clear that the way that we measure and define the things that we need to do are more collective in nature.
Thank you for sharing that. How can a company's digital infrastructure strategy actually accelerate a move toward regenerative environments? Are there tools that can be used?
Yeah, platforms and digitizing all the aspects of your company make it easier to collaborate and make it easier to cross boundaries. And if you're working on collective problems, you have to have that kind of infrastructure to be able to do that easily. And it's not just how you operate our financial systems, how you fund and incent innovation, how you organize, govern. All these things are made easier with digital tools. And it enables really us to move from corporate innovation to systems innovation, right? So if you're moving outside the four walls of an entity, of an organization, and you're working on collective problems, you have to work on the systems that enable you to cooperate, on the systems that enable you to create collective value. So I think that's really what digital infrastructure enables.
So we all do, right? So how will technologies like artificial intelligence and digital twins and sensors and all those kinds of things help us better manage an ecological system and also to build circular business models out there? How do you see those kinds of technologies supporting that effort?
So, building on my last response, first and foremost, it helps us get outside the four walls of our individual organizations, right? These kind of tools help us see more collectively the kinds of impact that we as individual organizations have on broader problems. And they may not be as impactful as we think, right? And so then there's another aspect that I think AI and digital twins are going to help us do. And that's to move from kind of modeling or scenario planning to shaping and seeding new futures, right? Because once you have the ability to see patterns with the use of AI or model things with digital twins, it enables you to start acting and what I refer to as seeding. In a complex system, you can't control it. You can't say, I want the system to do this because it's too diverse. There are too many participants. But what you can do is prepare alternative models. And when the system is ready to change or shift, you can have those models ready. And I think AI and digital twins will help us build and precede those kinds of models for new futures.
Yeah, let's dig a little bit deeper into the term digital twins itself. What does that mean to you, David?
So a twin, the way I think about it, is a model of a complex system that can help you understand how different changes in that system will kind of proliferate or ripple through the system in ways that our own minds as humans can't do. So using a digital twin that's enabled with AI, it helps us better make decisions and understand possible futures in ways that we couldn't do on our own.
Oh, yeah. And when I hear digital twin, especially in the context we're talking about today, David, I'm imagining things like a smart city where you can model the entire city and say, what if we chose to drive less in the downtown area? How will that impact our air quality? And what if we planted more trees, more parks, more green space in these areas? And this was what we could get from that. How would that change our air quality? So the ability to simulate all these models and get live data from all of those sources too. So you're seeing live data. You can then tweak the numbers to see how that might impact everything else. That's fascinating. And I know a lot of what TCS is focused on is how do we create those digital twins that will allow us to find better models and better environments through simulation and then going out there and doing that in the real world. So that's a lot of fun there. So that gets us to, how can simulation modeling and other AI-powered foresight tools help organizations improve long-term sustainability and planning and better manage climate-related risk? So if we have all these digital platforms in place, we have these digital twins in place, we have sensors everywhere, so we're trying to collect enough data to create realistic models that will help us improve our environments. How do you see that actually applied? Do you have any examples, use cases, case studies?
Yeah, I'll build on your kind of city planning using simulation to think how we better design cities. As AI progresses, I see it moving in along the lines of a recent article. It was written by another one of our colleagues, Michael Dietrich. He talks about the ability for AI not only to help us understand patterns in real time, but for it to co-create with us new directions or the ability to take action, right? So the example that I can think of is a traffic management system that's enabled by digital twins and AI in a city. So it's not just about how do we better design our roads, our infrastructure. It's about understanding, simulating in real time as traffic is moving, right? And redirecting traffic through sensors or your systems so that you avoid traffic congestion before it happens, right? So the ability to manage those kind of things, I think he refers to it as hyper reality, but the ability to manage those kind of things and take action live as they're occurring rather than it being a function of planning or design is where I think the ability for AI to move and support co-creating and taking action with humans in a collaborative way is what I think is really interesting about where this technology is going.
So with these kinds of digital platforms in place, do you think they have the opportunity to maybe even organize or self-organize different, cross-industry groups or public-private ecosystems? Do you see those emerging around shared motivations and ambitions, or how might that kind of reorganize society around accomplishing some of these goals?
As the problems are not going to go away, especially around climate, stuff like that. We're kind of behind in our progress of addressing that. As we become more aware of those things, we'll be more motivated. As I said earlier, infrastructure, platforms, ecosystems, those are all things that have been emerging for some time. And the ability to collaborate more easily, the recognition that no one organization can solve these collective problems, and the enabling of commons, whether it's shared data or sharing risks or sharing investment. These are all kinds of things that these technologies, these platforms will enable And I think it'll make it easier for us to collectively address sustainability.
I think it's increasingly difficult to argue, David, that it's not in all of our best interest to have a healthy ecosystem around us. But how do profit-oriented, capitalistic commercial enterprises find the balance in that tension between how much should a profit-oriented business invest in trying to do their part and how much should they return to their shareholders, in effect? Talk to us about your perspective on that tension.
Yeah, I mean, it's real, right? And it's what's expected. It's a systemic problem. That's the system that we have. That's how we create value. And it kind of locks us into an unsustainable future. So it requires systemic change, right? I don't expect within that system companies to change their motivations because that's how the system works, right? So the question is when will we get to a point of complexity and when the consequences become dire that we want to change the system, right? And then I think things can change. I mean, you could, for example, in our current system, you can have a company that is net zero, it has circular supply chains, and our issues with climate aren't better off as a result. Right, the impact is limited. I think as an example, Microsoft has offset all of the carbon that they have produced in the history of their company. Right, but what difference has that made in terms of our collective problem, sustainability? So I think as the system becomes more fragile, the motivations will change. We'll have to focus more collectively, more on the system, and once we change the system, then how we operate within it naturally will change.
So a lot of our focus, as you know, David, as futurists, is talking about the impact of various developments on kind of cross-domain. And by domain, we mean things like science and technology and societal impacts and economic and geopolitical and philosophical and environmental, all those different domains. Do you see sustainability as primarily problem and within one or a group of those domains, or what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, so the environment or sustainability or nature is not a domain. It's the context within which all other domains operate, right? Without nature, without this planet that we live on, we wouldn't have those other domains. We wouldn't have science or technology. Life wouldn't exist. So it's the context, right, within which we have to look at convergence, right? It's a really a form of intelligence, right? The Earth has a way of operating that enables us to exist, that enables us to do the things that we do, to kind of work on the kind of challenges and problems that we perceive as important. And so understanding that intelligence that the Earth brings and how it's worked successfully for billions of years is really what I think we need to think about within the context of when we're imagining possible future scenarios. Because without that foundational kind of piece of our convergence model, all the other ones wouldn't exist. So that's the way that I think about it.
So do you see the solution, our environmental challenges, is that a scientific solution, a tech solution, a societal solution? Where do you find the solution to that?
It's across all of them. They're all interdependent. I mean, that's the essence of complexity, right? When you have diverse impactors, right, that make it difficult to solve a problem that's highly uncertain or very difficult because of the nature of its complexity. So that's the way I look at it. I think the ultimate goal for all of us is understanding that we're in this complex system and we can't control it and it is uncertain. And it requires us, if we want to thrive in that kind of system, we have to change the way that we live. We have to change the way that we interact with each other, the way that we define value, the way that we create it, and take lessons from the way that nature has done it successfully for millions, if not billions of years.
Mm. So what does a successful transition to a sustainable future look like? So, David, you and I, as futurists, we talk about scenarios a lot. Let's think through various scenarios. If the cascading impacts of the future lead us to here, what scenario are we going to be presented with? If the challenges and the world evolves in another way, what scenario is that going to leave us with? So, what does a successful transition to a sustainable future look like to you in daily life? Like, what would daily life look like if we had achieved that scenario?
So I'll build on what I responded in the last question, and that's thriving in complexity, right? So it's recognizing that having the kind of a world that we want to have requires us to work in a highly complex system that we can't control and that's uncertain. So we have to be adaptable, right? So in terms of daily life, it's clean air, it's seasonal food, dignified work, shared purpose. A place where systems aren't perfect, but they're aligned. There's a sense of understanding around what's happening, what does it mean, what can we do about it, and that's kind of referred to in complexity science as coherence. So we need to be able to kind of work in this way to be comfortable with uncertainty, to be comfortable with complexity, and adjust our historical ways of interacting with each other. It's less about control. It's more about relationship. It's more about diversity and reciprocity and flexibility in the way that we work in the future.
David, I want to thank you so much for bringing your expertise to the podcast today. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure, KB. It's been a long time coming. It was fun.